normally there's a visibility issue at the start, which generally then heads to a cash flow issue. And you can be growing, you can be profitable and growing fast. So you can, on the face of it, when you're talking to your friends down the pub, you've got a very successful business, but at the same time, you're pulling your hair out because you're struggling to fund payroll and struggling to fund tax payments. So it's your cash, it's just you haven't collected it. I will never have a fixed budget on marketing spend. For me, it's always, as long as it's within the parameters that fit the P&L, the parameters that fit the lifetime value of the product, I will always have an unlimited marketing budget.
Welcome to Treyd Secrets, the podcast where we go deep with operators building and scaling real inventory-heavy businesses. Dan runs a fractional CFO practice that works exclusively with D2C fashion, footwear and apparel brands. He's been in clothing and retail finance for close to 20 years. Dan, big welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Let's get straight into it. So when you open the books of a new client, say a fashion brand doing 2 million in revenue, what's the pattern that you keep seeing?
So normally the starting point is generally either fairly terrible financials, often 6 months old, often not really set up. And this isn't a problem with them. This is probably how they've had to focus. The founders have had to wear a lot of hats and focus on getting growth up to say 2 million. But often the operations are lagging behind, I think is the right way to say it. There'll be out-of-date financials. They maybe won't be monthly. It won't be set up to be aligned for a D2C brand, for example, or a fashion brand, a retail brand. So they won't have the right margins and the pieces in the right place for them to actually make improvements. So normally there's a visibility issue at the start, which generally then heads to a cash flow issue.
So visibility, it seems like a big one. Is there also a difference between, say, what a founder thinks that the financial picture is and what you think the financial picture is?
Yeah. So a lot of the time they they'll come on saying, I need more cash to grow. I need more cash to grow. And because obviously you see the pain is I've run out of the cash. And actually the other side of it is that when you look into that, they actually don't know their own business. So they don't know where their cash is. They don't know how long it's taking to kind of run through a cycle. So actually there is an element there where, sometimes they do need cash, and sometimes when I see them, they've already panicked and pressed the button several times on some poor cash choices, I guess. Some of them are needed at the time. I'm not going to say people would do anything to keep their business, so they're not necessarily poor at the time if that's where they are, and every funding serves a purpose. But quite a lot of the time, that panic is due to them believing that they need that extra cash in order to grow, but actually they just haven't got the visibility of their own numbers yet. And actually that's probably a fairly simple fix that could be done over a handful of months, and then they would be able to make a proper decision. So
when you have visibility, you are able to find cash essentially.
You can see where it's stuck in the cycle, because they're like a 2 million business. If it D2C only, they're probably receiving if it's D2C only, they're probably receiving their cash from customers quite quickly. So Shopify out 3 to 4 days, Amazon maybe 7 days. If they've got wholesale, you might find there is some extended terms then. But if it's D2C, which can be problematic, but overall, if it's D2C only, they're probably getting their cash from customers quite quickly. The issue generally is actually further back in the system. So how long, a lot of the time they're buying. Poor buying means they overbuy, maybe because if they're 2 million, so if they have too many SKUs, and maybe that means that they're having to buy a minimum order quantity on every one of these SKUs, and maybe if you're getting it in 3 colors and a size range or whatever, that then means that they're also, by nature, founders have to be ambitious. They have to be enthusiastic about the future, because that's the point of them owning and being in that business. So they believe every single new range, new SKU, new style will be a smash hit, and they have to believe that, but they also have to buy. They leave a lot of cash in their warehouse on the shelf when if a style doesn't take off. So they almost need to believe it's going to work, but also take precautionary action on the first couple of orders. But there's normally cash stuck in the warehouse, cash stuck on being paid too early to suppliers. It's normally there is cash there, it's just in the wrong place.
Here's a lot to unpack here. I think it's like maybe we should start on almost like the basic, that this mythological metric, the cash conversion cycle, right?
Yeah.
What is it, and what does it typically look like in a D2C brand?
So it's the number of days between paying out a supplier for inventory all the time, and then sitting in your warehouse, and then finally getting paid cash back by your customers. So how long stock is sitting still, how long customers take to pay you, minus the terms you get from how long you get to pay your supplier. So it's the net of those three. The shorter the cycle, the less capital you need to function. So if you think you've got a and the longer the cycle, the more cash is tied up, permanently unavailable to you, and it might be there somewhere on your balance sheet, but it's not there when you need it. It's not in your cash account when you need it to spend, if you need to pay a VAT bill or a tax bill, or if you need to fund ad spend or place the next big order. It's not where you need it at the right time, because it's somewhere in this cycle for how long it's taking from putting money in to getting money out.
What's a sort of good and bad cash conversion cycle look like in a D2C brand?
So a well-run brand could easily be 30, 40 days maybe. It depends on the cycle. If you have wholesale, there's going to be an extension on that. But if you could, a lot of brands I see are in the 65 to 100 days area. Ideally, you've got a very short amount of time before customers pay you. If you can keep, say, 45 or maybe 60 days in stock, but actually get 30 days terms from who you pay, you can kind of get that to 30 or 40 days. It doesn't always work. You sometimes have time on the water. It depends where your supplier is located. I generally see 65 to 100 days. And if you think of, using a slightly larger example here, but say an 8 million brand, the difference between 100 days and 30 days is roughly £400,000 to £500,000 locked up in cash.
That's enormous.
Just on the cost of sales, because actually, if you think about it across a year, it's a lot of locked up cash. If you're running at, 30 days is sometimes too tight, depending on your cycle. But then that doesn't mean that you're stuck with that cycle. You don't have to buy from that supplier in that location, or you can buy smaller quantities first, and you can work throughout. The whole process can be worked upon to bring that down, and then you need less cash in your business to run. So it's your cash. It's just you haven't collected it.
So if a brand comes to you, they're like, say, 100, 120 days cash conversion cycle. What are the usual levers you pull to get that down to your 30 to 60, what seems like the good number?
Yeah, so it depends where it is. So first of all, it's about, again, it goes back to that visibility point. Like, they need to have up-to-date financials, need to have up-to-date monthly financials, because you need to find out where it is. You need to find out where the where the actual cash is sitting. So if, for example, they haven't got wholesale, so they haven't got a long receivable cycle, and it then comes down to, is it the terms of how quickly they're paying their supplier, or is it how long it's sitting in stock? If it's how long it's sitting in stock, then you have to start digging into, well, if your lead time is 6 weeks, why are you holding 12 weeks or 15 weeks of stock? Is it because of or buying decisions you made a year and a half ago, in which case at the next liquidation event, such as the Black Friday or January sales, let's separate out the say, like the C SKUs on your ABC analysis, the ones that are your dead stock or slow moving stock, and discount those, because you're never going to buy them again, and turn them back into cash. And that makes up the discounting in your Black Friday, whereas you'd never want to do that with your core stock, because you need to turn that back into cash to buy more of your core product. So if it turns out that that's where it is, then that's where we'll go first. If it turns out it's in supplier terms, you can negotiate with the supplier. So, that's free. They can, as they've grown into, a lot of the times, the terms with the supplier are the same terms as when they were doing 3, 4, 500,000 a year revenue, and now they're doing 2, 3, 4 million. They've not actually pushed those terms, and actually maybe they're still paying up front for things. So there's always negotiations. Once you've got to the point where you've looked through all of those, then it comes to a point where you start matching finance against some of those gaps where there is a gap there what maybe can't change. That's when you start matching to cover those gaps elsewhere.
And when you say matching financing to gaps, what do you mean? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So the way that I think about that is, if the cycle is too long, but the majority of it is because maybe the inventory days are relatively reasonable, but actually they've got long receivable days because they've got wholesalers on 90 days and maybe to receive the cash in, and also long, not really much in the way of payable days because they're paying their suppliers up. You could match financing as long as you've got your right financials in place and and you've got visibility. You can match specific finance products against those. So you could match a buy now pay later, a bit like Treyd, buy now pay later inventory product, and match it against the cycle that you need. So if you can work out your cash conversion cycle, you can match and say, right, well, I know that I can get my inventory days from 90 down to 60. So that's 30 of them gone. And actually my wholesale terms, we're renegotiating from 90 days to 60. So that's another 30 days off that end. But actually we need to match some of the wholesale funding, and maybe we need to match a portion to the payables funding. But the other thing is that when you go and use, say, an MCA or a revenue lender, that immediately starts. So you can go and borrow 200,000 off of one of those. Click a button, it's there in your account the same day. But often that gets repaid in 60 or 90 days. And actually, if your cash conversion cycle is 120 days, and you've just borrowed over 90 days, by the end of that 90 days, you've got no cash left, and you still have 30 more days until you're going to receive that cash. So it's about making deliberate choices and about being deliberate, because otherwise you end up buying another loan. So it's about making deliberate choices to ensure that you are matching the product against the gap and the type of gap.
And what's the most common mistake you see in sort of this matching?
In smaller brands, it generally comes to that. The quickest thing is to press a button on a quick and easy loan, and you might borrow 100,000 or 200,000 because that's what you need to cover your cash flow today. But actually, you don't know what your cash flow is doing. Normally, a lot of smaller brands don't have a cash flow forecast, and you don't know what your cash flow is doing in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks from now. So actually, whether you've borrowed the right amount, whether you've borrowed it over the right period, it's a guess. And then what you're waiting on is the fact that when you've repaid most of it, you're just going to have to do it again to cover the next gap. And you end up almost borrowing to cover VAT payments and things. And you can be growing, you can be profitable and growing fast. So you can, on the face of it, when you're talking to your friends down the pub, you've got a very successful business, but at the same time, you're pulling your hair out because you're struggling to fund payroll and struggling to fund tax payments because you haven't set the funding against the gaps in your cash conversion cycle. Again, I'd always try and reduce the cash conversion cycle first, because first and foremost, that's free. Working on how to reduce that first and foremost, that's something that people can do straight away in their brand. But then once they've done that, it's about, as I said, deliberate choices to structure their funding and financing in a way that matches their specific gaps and where they sit.
That's really interesting. And then on that source of working with the cash conversion cycle before even going to funding, inventory, in my experience at least, is the place where a lot of cash often is buried, hopefully not dead, but
regularly.
It's like, how should a founder think about inventory? What is the right level of stock? I mean, you have overstock, you have understock, you have dead stock. It's a complicated topic to some degree.
Yeah. There's assuming your stock is set up correctly in your Shopify, there is a report in there called a product ABC analysis, and that's a starting point. Sometimes people can't use that because they put too many extras, or there's archive products in there, or they've but if essentially the principle is, whether you use that report or you run your own, the principle is, and it's probably not far off the Pareto's 80-20 principle, but the idea being that your core SKUs are going to make up the bulk of your sales, whether it's 70%, 60%, 80%. You're going to have a core base of SKUs that make up those, and you should never be out of stock in those. And you will continually resell those products. You will be continually be able to, you can reorder them, you can buy in bulk, and you can fund that gap if you need to from a cash perspective, but you can buy them because you know that they're continuously selling, and you have data showing that they've sold for this long, and this is the run rate. And then you have your B products, which potentially are complementary. They might make up 10% of your products. They may be either you keep them. Your decision framework there is, if they're complementary to an A product, then potentially you'd keep them, or if they're a good gateway product and someone will then always go and buy the A product afterwards, that's potentially worth it. If they're not one of those things, I would also consider removing them from the SKU list. And finally, your C products probably only make up 5% of your sales, but regularly make up 30-40% of your stockroom. Normally, what this looks like is a new season, a new style, a new a new punt, and they're always a punt, and that's the nature of what you're doing. You are placing bets, and if your agreed minimum order quantity with your factory is 1,000 pieces, and you need to have it in 3 colors and times this many sizes, or on your size chart, you're investing 20, 30, 50,000 pounds, 100,000 pounds into that punt. Actually, the smart negotiation there is, and normally this will be in your storeroom. So you have to first of all deal with this problem, and work out which products you don't want to keep going with. If they're the C products or the B products without help to the A's, you go, right, well, they're my Black Friday discount. So I can still, on the top of Black Friday, I can still put 30% off, 40% off, but I'm not putting those on my core A products. I'm maintaining the margin on my A products. So there is ways of clearing down those products. But from a future perspective, the thing that I quite like to do is actually get the founder to, again, this goes back to visibility, but once you've got forecasts in place and you know how much you're ordering, if you can provide a 12-month forecast to your supplier showing your ordering cycle through the year, it might be variable, but by giving them a forecast, you're allowing them the awareness that they can hire, they can buy machinery, they can place bulk orders on fabric or on that, so they can get things cheaper as well. So you can find that normally you'd go, can I have a bit of a cheaper price? But actually, a lot of the time, you can renegotiate terms, or you can renegotiate minimum order quantity. And so for new styles, you can bring your minimum order quantity down. And then once you've proven that that's either going to join the A list or the C list, if it joins the A list, you go back to normal minimum order quantities. But for these trials, you have to get them lower. So often I'm seeing brands with every trial they've ever done is £20,000 sitting in the back of their warehouse, dusty in the corner.
My God. What do you tell people to do with those dusty things in the corner?
Quite often you'll find that, and I mean, a lot of the time they won't have a stock valuation. So you're kind of, eventually you'll look at it and you'll go, your stock has been £500,000 for the last 14 months. It hasn't moved. That's the number the accountant put in last year. So a lot of the time that's the situation as well. So there's not actually a revaluation happening. It's difficult because you don't want to create a cottage industry in finance. You don't want to kind of make them, they don't need it at that size. They don't need all those roles. So kind of a hybrid is generally right for these. So they need a good bookkeeper, and then a few key hybrid pieces in place that enable them to improve their cash cycle, improve their cash flow, improve their unit economics. A semi-regular, either quarterly or monthly stock revaluation is useful, and you can do it so that that you can make it relatively automated, but that gives them an idea of what's in there. But if they've determined that actually of that 500,000 in stock, if we can look through it and say, well, actually 300,000 of that is your core stock that you never want to go out of, you just need to keep that on reorder, getting that. But actually of the other 200,000, that half of that stock or most of that stock, you probably should never order again. And it's actually an ego thing to remove it from the website. But it's not helping you, and actually it's holding 200,000 of your cash there that you could use to pay for the A products, or more of that, or more ad spend.
So the C's and some of the B's, that's where you can go and get the cash.
The Bs are sometimes the middle ground ones. I generally go on the idea of they're not in your A products, remove them. But then there are sometimes good arguments from founders to say, well, actually they buy this one first, then that one, or this is always the add-on buy. So like that, it's unique in every brand. There will be, but ultimately speaking, there will be a split between your core that you can keep reselling, and actually then you can put money behind the ad spend. You'll have more cash available to put behind the ad spend. You'll have more cash available to make sure you've always got all sizes in stock or all colors in stock, which makes your ad spend more efficient anyway. So a lot of the time, brands, they will try a new product regularly, and you need that newness. You need the constant freshness. And they're very quick to add a new product, but very, very slow to remove them. So you kind of press see more on the website, and you just keep rolling down and down and down as you see. And then there's kind of part sizings and part colors, and you can just see the kind of the trail of everything they've ever tried over X years. And actually those things should have been kept tight as to what's selling. Keep the cash available for ad spend to grow those, and then tight new tests on new products to see whether it's going to join that list or be bumped off into the next sale season.
I think that's very, very clear as well, in the sense of like season Bs, sunset if it's not selling or important, and then for the A's, work with your supplier, right? And how often do people even do that, as actually calling their supplier and sharing a forecast and agreeing on a plan?
Never. They're like most of the time, suppliers have to make pricing decisions based on looking backwards and saying, well, here's what you've ordered, here's what we've grown together with. So suppliers are kind of, they don't know what you're planning for ad spend. They don't know what you're. I don't think you should share your whole P&L with them, but there's no reason why you can't share forecast units and forecast cost of sales with them, especially if it's a major supplier that's going to take up a significant proportion of your cost of sales for the year. They will likely have a decent idea anyway, because they'll know what you sell it for and what they're but if this is going to be 30% of your if this supplier is going to be, say, 30% of your revenue, allowing that supplier the ability to plan ahead and hire, as I said. And the other thing is, most factories have got a building and assets, plant and machinery, so they can borrow much cheaper than you can as well. So actually they might be able to get you cheaper pricing, because they can actually they probably can borrow on with kind of bank loans and hard assets, single digits, and so can actually afford to give you either. I wouldn't even push for the discount. I mean, I'd always want, sometimes if your margins are bad, then yes, you need to improve things and you need to improve the cost of sales. But sometimes I'll find that actually people, brand founders, will keep trying to push the screw on the percentage of COGS, when actually that negotiation, that and it shouldn't just be one hit. You shouldn't just do it once at a time. It was little nibbles, but it should be actually the focus should be on improving the terms or improving the minimum order quantities. That is actually a lot more beneficial to a brand founder than actually just taking 0.5% off or 1% off of the COGS, because actually at the end of the day, if you're still buying the wrong minimum order quantity, and on the you're going to end up having to discount it all at 30-40% off anyway, which is going to harm your P&L more than that 0.5% difference. So you'd be better off getting the right minimum order quantities for trial products and the right payment terms for your cash cycle.
That's really interesting and really smart, I think. Is there a size? I mean, we all understand that Nike and Apple can have a long-term forecast with their suppliers and do detailed plans. Like, when does this type of strategic supplier work start being relevant?
I mean, you can have the mindset from day one. So I guess there is an awareness issue there. You can have that mindset from day one. I guess in the early days, you're always going to be at the whims. All suppliers are going to be larger than you. You're going to be one of their smallest buyers. I think you and again, normally you don't know this is a problem if you don't have clear financials. So it's oftentimes brands won't look at this until they're doing low 7 figures a year, because they, at that point, before there's normally a kind of a crux point in the low seven figures a year where they go, I need to get hold of this. I'm having too, if this cash cycle is bad, the more you grow, the more painful it feels, because the longer you've got this cash outstanding, and every year you grow, even if you're profitable, if you do 2 million and make 10%, 200,000 at the bottom, you have to, that 200,000 might go into stock for next year. So immediately it's whipped out. But you still have a tax bill to pay, and you still have, maybe changes in your operating costs and changes, all your other costs going up. So growth is very painful from a cash perspective. And in those, it probably should happen earlier, but I generally see it in the low mid seven figures, when it becomes really painful. Continued growth becomes really painful, and they start looking at ways of reducing it. But ideally, if people knew the right things to do, they would do it from day one, or kind of 500,000 or so.
We continue getting back to this financial visibility topic, which seems the base. What is a base sort of setup process or that you need to have a growing brand that you feel that you're actually in control of and actually understand fully? What's a good starting point or a setup
from a finance team, or from a funding perspective?
Or especially from a finance almost like process and toolkit, or like what do you actually need in place to be in control of this?
So in that kind of, I'm going to call it the sprint to 1 million a year, I would say you probably need to have a good bookkeeper. At that size, they're not particularly expensive. You're talking several hundred a month, depending on where you are and where you use. I would say push to have a bookkeeper that is very focused on your industry. You're paying a little bit more than a bookkeeper from kind of your local town, but actually the benefit of having someone who knows D2C, knows retail, knows wholesale, and understands where the margins, knows to put where the variable costs go, to have a product margin, a gross margin, and a contribution margin, and being able to track those properly. Maybe understands clearing accounts, and understands the key financing that is available in that industry. Having that kind of setup very early on, it is crucial. And during that kind of sprint to 1 million, you probably just need the bookkeeper and just focus on that. And there is also those early days where you probably are pressing on a Shopify Capital or Wayflow or one of those kind of revenue-based loans. The reason being, you don't have any history, so they do hold a place. But for they give access to cash to people that need it, and they do hold a place in that world because you have no history, you don't have much in the way of financials in place, and so those brands have access to cash in order to get going and prove their business model. Once they kind of come above 1 million, they are probably then starting to somewhere between that 1 to maybe 2 to 5 million. They're starting to look around at what else they need to get in place. I think at that point, you probably are needing to be able to speak to your supplier with some forecasts, and speak to and be able to get lending, and you start to move away from those maybe revenue-based loans and into something which fits gaps, like I said earlier, like fits the right gaps. But then to do that, you need the visibility. Generally speaking, often I see it at the kind of 4 or 5 million up to, most of my clients are kind of 4 or 5 million up to 25 million. But I think the pain starts earlier. I think the pain does start a little bit earlier than that.
Is there an acid test or similar for if it's like, when do I have enough visibility? What's the sort of benchmark? Do I need to have monthly financials on day one, inventory update in which frequency, or what is it that you want to see to be able to run the business?
I generally go down the lines of, I could have everything perfect, and then I'm able to make an 100% decision based on everything perfect. But by that point, I've put in a a whole cottage industry of finance into a brand, and by then, that'll be 5%, 3, 4, 5% of revenue just on the finance team, and actually the what the decision framework doesn't need that much clarity. So I think there is a middle ground between not knowing anything at all and making poor decisions, or no, reactive decisions, I guess is the right word. And there is a kind of a middle hybrid. So if I'm reviewing a client's financials, so on call client, sometimes if they've got quarterly financials, I can make a good estimate from that. I can make reasonable decisions on where they need to improve their unit economics, where they're going to need to, where they're likely biting from a cash perspective. I prefer it to be monthly, and I will generally move people to monthly. I think bare minimum they need monthly financials, but I wouldn't want them to move to a full kind of doing everything perfect, because they've got to invest the money in ad spend, they've got to invest the money in products, they've got to invest the money in various places. So it's easy for me, and I'm biased to say it here, but actually I would, from a growth perspective, I would prefer it goes into other areas of the P&L. So I kind of almost want the minimum visibility that will enable us to make good decisions. And normally that there's things in there that won't cost too much. Having a stock revaluation every month or every quarter at least, and monthly financials is hundreds a month. It's not many thousands a month, and you can keep your money invested in ad spend and growth, and focus on reducing your distribution costs, focus on reducing your discounts and your refunds, and keeping your money focused on those things there.
What is keeping so many people from getting to this level? I mean, monthly or quarterly financials, regular stock revaluations. It seems doable.
Yes, but it's not been most brand founders come from either a product or a creative background or a marketing background. So it seems simple, but actually there are things in the creative world that I don't understand that would seem very simple to them. So there's different different experts in every area. So I guess it's about having the right experts in your corner. But for a brand founder, as I said, they wear a lot of hats. They have to spend a lot and an inordinate amount of time in product and in creative, and also in marketing, because that's the one that sucks up a lot of their time, is that because the marketing can go so well and so wrong, almost sometimes it's so variable, and there's such a demand for content nowadays that it takes up, when you've got a smaller team, it takes up a lot of time. So it doesn't, like with everything, the things on the corner of your desk, the things that are burning today, the deadlines today, and then there's the things in the corner of your desk that have been sitting there because you should have done them, but actually you didn't. And that's generally what happens with operations and finance within that. They lag the growth. So quite often when I'll speak to a founder and they'll say, I'm doing 8 million a year, but I'll look and their financials, maybe they'll have a good bookkeeper in place by then, but their financials look like a 1 million brand, but they're doing 8 million and they've actually grown, trebled or doubled in the last year, or trebled in the last year, and actually they haven't got the right tech stack in place. There's some very cheap bits of kit which kind of reduce the workload, that can speed things up, and they haven't got the right processes in place but they're now placing significant size bets. Like I said to you before, having an 8 million brand, 100 days or 30 days cash cycle is 400,000 to 500,000. So there's some significant 30% cost of sales on an 8 million brand is 2.5 million a year. So there's some big numbers at play by then.
What's the delta from the 1 million brand to the 8 million brand in when you do it right? So in the 1 million brand, you have a bookkeeper that keeps your books up to date on a monthly basis, including stock revaluation and your sort of unit economics are there, right?
Yeah.
And then at an 8 million brand, what's the delta?
I guess I probably mostly start to work with brands kind of the mid 7 figures up to kind of 25 million or so before they kind of need their own full-time CFO at that point. I would say somewhere in the low to mid 7 figures, they should be starting to get some extra support. Now, at that stage there, that can be variable. If they are working with a D2C focused bookkeeper, maybe that person has enough training behind them that, as well as just providing them the basics on Xero or QuickBooks or whatever they're using, maybe they can provide them some commentary. So maybe there's an add-on they can do with some kind of just analysis or commentary. So you might find they can eke out a year or two out of that. There is, by about 4 or 5 million a year, they're normally at a point where they're having to make funding decisions. They're having to make they normally have got breakage in their unit economics. Often they're not seeing the profit that they should be. So by about 4 or 5 million, it makes sense to be pulling in a fractional CFO. Again, I'm biased because I am one, but choose one. I ideally choose one which is in your industry, because they've seen all the tech. They know what the margins look like. They know the exact issues you have. Whereas if you get one which is very generic, you might be their only D2C or retail client, so they're learning with you. So ideally, you find someone that understands your brand, your model, your working capital needs, and about that kind of mid 7 figures point is a good time for that. But during that point, there is definitely, and I've noticed there is some early pain in that kind of low 7 figures that it's a tricky time. There's a point where they where you are starting to need that support in the low 7 figures, and you're starting to, and you can, maybe it's a fractional finance manager, or there is a, you can use your accountant for just an additional conversation a month and just start to talk through some of these margins. Again, I would go with someone who has got some training and experience in your field, in your vertical, whether your sales channels or your niche. But yeah, it definitely becomes a point that by mid 7 figures and going towards 8 figures, you definitely need financial strategy in your corner, because by then the bets are big and they can go wrong as well as right.
Who does the forecast typically? Is that something you expect from your accountant, fractional CFO?
So the accountants, so the way it generally works is that a bookkeeper will do your transactional work. They will plug what's happened. They will make, and a good one in your space will be able to. I will generally support a bookkeeper and make sure they've got all the margins set up accurately. But a good one in your space will be able to have the transactional things that have happened in your business. Your accountant will look backwards and make sure, from a compliance perspective, that you're not going to go wrong with tax and government, and you are on the right legal footing. None of them are looking out for your margins, really. You can probably find that there are some places where bookkeeping can turn into financial planning support, but it's when you get a fractional CFO in or something similar to that is where you start to get forward looking. So you start to get forecasts. You start to get someone that's taking your margins, spotting where the problems are within them. You're bloated in your OPEX. You're spending 28% on distribution costs, whereas industry average is 13%. You're giving away 14% on discounts when average should be 7% with this. So there are various different things where you could immediately spot and say this. A lot of the time it's over discounting, and actually you can often, the discounts don't correlate to new sales, and actually you're finding that you're that actually you can improve the margin several points just through improving that. So if by being able to know where to look, that's where you get a fractional CFO. They're going to improve your unit economics. They're going to improve your cash flow cycle, give you access to better tiers of funding, cheaper funding that matches your needs better, matches the cycle that you have, and even improves that cycle. So kind of says, is able to point out and say, well, your supplier's giving you the run round here. You can actually get better terms. I've seen this elsewhere, that you can get 45 days terms, whereas your supplier's giving you 0-day terms or so. So being able to kind of call that out, that's where it becomes that becomes that kind of level of financial strategy. That's important.
I really want to dig into. I mean, it's interesting. You're saying people do inefficient discounting, and I've heard you before also say like a lot of fashion brands lose money on Black Friday, and it's like, what's your what's like walk me through how to think of discounting and big events like Black Friday.
So Black Friday, I have got clients that Black Friday, for a lot of clients, Black Friday can make up a significant portion of their year. So November and December, for most of that e-commerce cycle, they have a very sad January, and then kind of February payday, it kind of starts to come, and then they go in the rise through summer. They might have a summer sale, but November, December is their peak of every year. So it makes or breaks the year. Now, because of, like I said earlier, you don't want to be creating an entire cottage industry in finance. So a lot of the time, you're only really paying all of those bills in January or February. So the exact time when you've got your lowest sales is when all of the bills from November and December come in. So what you essentially want is that November and December, you're making a good profit. That should be the bulk of your annual profit. It is coming in those months. And if you, most websites, you see what websites are like over Black Friday, 20% off everything, 30% off everything. The general rule of thumb on a reasonable kind of set of financials is that every 10% discount removes 30% of your contribution margin. So contribution margin is your final margin after all variable costs. So COGS, selling costs, distribution costs, and ad spend. And it, your numbers will vary. However, average is that it's about 10% discount removes 30% of the contribution margin. Regularly, you'll see 20 or 30% discount, and you can imagine that's a contribution margin of 0, sometimes loss-making. And actually, that loss-making contribution margin, most of the time, it's on every product on the website. So actually, that's a product that you're going to have to then reorder next month at full price. And you've just burnt through, and all those customers are, from a demand perspective, have saved up their money for Black Friday, bought products that you've made 0 or even worse loss-making margin on, and they don't need to buy again. And then you need to rebuy those A products again next month because you've sold so many of them, and everyone's high-fiving and taking photos of their account, and you've got the largest clearing account you've ever had and the largest bank account. But then January comes and you've also got the largest VAT bill you've ever had, the largest Meta bill you've ever had, and the largest Supplier bill you've ever had. And a lot of the times when you weigh it out as a quarter, if you look at November, December, and January together, you find that brands are loss-making or break-even then, and that's when they should be taking the majority of their profit. So, and this goes back to that ABC. You can have a Black Friday with a decent discount on the top. You can have a kind of 20, 30% off, but make sure it's those products that you're never going to buy again, because at that point, the price of the COGS is irrelevant to you. It's a sunk cost because you're never going to buy it again. You made a bet, it didn't work. All that matters now is turning it back into cash to buy again. So the you can still have that discount on those targeted products, the ones that you've taken punts throughout the year. You've tested the newness, you've tested the freshness. Of your 10 punts, 2 of them are join the A list, but 8 of them you're sitting on too much, maybe split sizing, split SKUs and so on. That becomes your discount, and you keep the rest of your stock less that are not discounted, so that because that season is high demand, people have got cash to spend in that season, so they will actually often buy the stock which is not on discount as well. And actually, you'll find that you'll go out of stock in your A products, but then all you've done is given away all the margin from them, but you've still got to pay all those bills in January. So it's easy to think you've won on the first week of December, but then go and get significant loans out in January and February when you've got bills to pay and tax to pay.
There's another one of those favorite hidden margin killers, which is returns. Which I guess also happens in January more than in December.
It all kicks in.
What are good or bad levels in returns, and how do returns affect your cash and financials?
This is very variable. It depends on the industry niche. It depends on the country. There are certain cultures. So, for example, in Germany, menswear is often 75% returns. So if you buy shirts in Germany, like Zalando, get very high returns for that sort of product. So there are certain cultures which are incredibly high for returns, and for a lot of the niches I work in, In the beauty niche, it's tiny. It's generally often, so perfumes and things like that is often a couple of percent, a few percentage points. The ones that, when it's fashion and footwear sizing, is often above 20%, 25%. If it's much above that, I think you then have a problem on your website, your sizing chart. There's some there's tools you can use now to, and there's various, you need to put a bit more effort into the exact description and the exact sizing. And I guess take surveys from that point is to find out exactly why. Is it the quality? Is it the size? Most of the time it's sizing. Almost, any survey you do, 80% will be the sizing. So you need to put a lot of effort into ensuring the sizing is correct. Again, also recognize you are not Amazon. So you don't need to provide free shipping and free returns and so on. There are brands that do that, but most small business owners have no place trying to compete with Costco, Amazon, or any of that market. Your market, they would say that the top 10% of consumers buy 40 to 50% of all consumer products, and the number changes year on year, country on country, but it broadly works out. You generally are, as a small brand, you probably should be looking more in the premium end of the pricing, making sure there is the right margin there. And therefore that also gives you the right margin to spend on making sure you've got maybe the right tool in place, or you've put the effort into reducing those returns. But you definitely shouldn't be trying to outcompete Amazon on that, and give them free returns, because then people will buy 3 of everything and return them. So it doesn't always work. There are definitely certainly tools you can use, but it is an area where you've spent the ad spend, you've spent the delivery cost, you've spent the selling fee, and then the stock. Also, even just the return of the stock into your warehouse, that costs you money to get that dressed back up and put back on the shelf for whatever it is. So there's quite a lot of burnt costs there, if you don't address that. So.
Speaking of Amazon, one topic I just have to touch upon it is channel expansion. I mean, you mainly work with D2C brands, but I guess you see, same as we do, that a lot of people are moving from D2C to multi-channel.
Yeah.
And it often looks really good. But what's your take on channel expansion? Because it can also be quite risky, can't it?
Yeah. Usually, brands try this too early. So as soon as you add an extra SKU, an extra warehouse, an extra channel, you're doubling, trebling, quadrupling your complexity. So if you add 5 extra SKUs, 3 extra channels, 2 warehouses, UK and US, or whatever it is you're doing, you are 10xing your complexity, and complexity costs money. You are increasing the needs for a finance team. You're increasing the needs for more employees. So the brands that are in the most channels, and when I see a brand and even in an early conversation, if I speak to them and they say, well, we have 3 stores, we're on Amazon, we're in on Shopify, we've got an EU and a UK Shopify, we're also doing wholesale, I know that their OpEx costs are going to be 30-40% of revenue, just from just listening to what channels there as a small brand. So I have a client that is in the beauty niche that has gone from, I joined them at 2 million 2 years ago, so they're solid 8 figures now, and they have stuck pretty much to Shopify, and it, they've stayed one channel and just got really, really good at what they do. There are lots of so there is a lot to be said about sticking to one channel and really nailing it. You can't be an expert everywhere. There is a halo impact. So if you add Amazon in, like the other side of the coin is you can't be an expert everywhere. You're gonna learn. You're gonna make poor efficiency choices. The halo impact is that if you've put the effort in to buy that customer on Meta and Google Ads, some people just prefer to buy elsewhere. So they might then next time type your name into Amazon. So you probably get, as you increase ad spend, there is a halo impact on your TikTok shop, on your on your Amazon as well. So if there is an easy way for you to fulfill and it doesn't cost you anything from a time and effort perspective, I don't have a problem. But think hard about it, because most of the time the complexity outweighs like you would have done a lot better in just focusing on your Shopify, how to get my ad spend from 2,000 a day to 4,000 a day to 8,000 a day to 12,000 a day than trying to do a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here and then add wholesale in over there with completely new terms that you won't be good at all of them. So it's better to focus on the ones that you can now and absolutely be world class at.
Focus. There's one more topic before I can do this all day. It's too much fun. But you also have, which I guess is a unique perspective from someone who's doing D2C, especially, also strong opinions and on marketing. You even say sometimes that a lot of brands are underspending on marketing.
Absolutely.
What's your take on this?
Yeah, a lot of the time, again, I probably say it too often, but it goes back to that visibility piece. If a lot of the time I will see brands and during kind of the COVID years, 2021, they could get away with significant year-on-year growth while spending 13% of revenue on ad spend or 15% of revenue on ad spend, 20% of revenue. The world has changed. Like the cost of Meta has gone up. Everyone's using ad spend now. Everyone's growing through paid channels. Realistically, to compete now, you likely need to be and it's not for every brand. It might be that if you've got a brand which is something that people type into Google, so a very easy brand that everyone types in the word into Google, then you can probably buy people very cheaply through Google Ads. But I'll regularly, when I look at a client, they will have, they will be spending 10-15% on ad spend, whereas actually this is a margin problem, because if they have got a 40% gross margin and they've got 20% operating costs, there's only a 20% gap in the middle there. And actually, if you want to make a profit at the bottom to grow stock, so this is a margins issue, not a brand issue or a marketing issue. There, the job, your job is to be able to outspend your competitors. Your job is to have such good operating margins, such phenomenal margins elsewhere in your P&L that you can afford to spend 40% and your competitors can only afford to spend 30% or 25%, because you will win, you will get the growth. And as long as you've set it up right, I don't want to see a brand with 20% net profit at the bottom. That's often done. And unless that brand is family owned and they're cash extraction, maybe that's the time when they're not looking for growth. But for most brands that are kind of trying to grow into 8 figures, you're better off trying to push that product margin, so the cost of getting the product to you, maybe up above 75-80%, the cost of delivery to ensure you've got a gross margin of say 60%, and getting your operating costs down to say 10%. Because if you've got a gross margin of 60%, you want to make a 10% profit on the bottom and 10% OPEX, that leaves you 40% in the middle there. And you can spend that 40% knowing you're still making 10% at the bottom. If you spend 40% on ad spend and you're good at it, and I guess, or you've got a good agency, you will get that growth and you will grow fast. And remember, your operating costs are fixed numbers normally, whereas the variable profit will keep growing. So actually, you'll get the arbitrage there as well. So most times when I see a brand, and I speak to them around their numbers, they're not getting the growth they want, they're not getting the cash they want, and a lot of the times they're just not investing in growth because they can't afford to. And a well-run brand will be able to outspend all of its competitors and still make, say, a 10 or 15% net margin at the bottom.
That's an awesome and unusual take from a CFO, right?
I will never have a fixed budget on marketing spend. For me, it's always, as long as it's within the parameters that fit the P&L, the parameters that fit the lifetime value of the product, as long, I will always have an unlimited marketing budget, because I guess you've got to keep track that you've got things in stock, and there's a whole range of moving parts around that. But I will never be along the idea of this is, you've got 100,000, 1 million, 2 million, whatever the number is. The answer is, if you've got enough in stock and you're still hitting this metric that fits the unit economics that we're looking for, you're still hitting this profit margin, then keep going. And if you can go from 1 million to 8 million in a year like this, then you're going to have breaking points. And I guess your job as a founder is to find those breaking points and fix them.
Mm.
And we can try all we want to try and fix them, but some of them are just going to happen, and you need to find them along the way and along the journey. But yeah, to get the growth a lot of brands are looking for, it's about realigning that P&L, realigning the unit economics to make enough space available. Because you're not just competing against your brands on Meta and so on. You're competing against anyone else that will appear in your avatar's feed. So if you sell a premium product, you might be up against a Mercedes ad, or you might be up against if you've got an ad that, again, for someone that sells for a lot more money, they might, if they've got a £200 average order value and they're going to spend 40%, they can spend a lot more customer acquisition cost than your £50 product. So your customer acquisition cost is lower. So I'm not saying you have to always be up there, but you have to understand that you're bidding against everyone that could appear in your avatar's feed. You're trying to find space in that feed. And if Meta's going to receive a £60 customer acquisition cost from someone and you can only afford to spend 30, you're not going to win the auction spaces. You're not going to win on the bidding platform, which means you're not going to get seen, which means you're not going to get the growth.
I'm almost like breathing in. Okay,
you've got to be careful. Like from a cash flow perspective, you've got to be careful. You have to have these things aligned. You have to know your cash flow cycle. You have to know your forecast. So there are the pieces in place that you have to have. Again, it comes back to that visibility point. You have to know your numbers inside out. However, that's the brands that I've worked with. I've got a couple that have kind of gone from low 7 figures to 20 million plus in just a handful of years. And again, they had an advantage that a couple of years ago Meta was easier and cheaper. Now it's harder. So I'm not saying it's repeatable all the time, but it is about knowing that you can invest more than your rivals can in this and still make a profit.
I think this is one of the most distilled insights ever, right? Have visibility, have your ABC in order to know where your cash is, and then you compete on outspending your competition on Meta.
Yeah. And other
that's the game.
Well. I guess that's the as you said earlier about other stores. Understand your unit. No one really understands the unit economics very well of TikTok Shop, for example. So a lot of the times you'll find that you think you're growing very fast on there, but actually you're loss making and the average order value is lower. Or so yeah, it's about understanding that every single one of your channels has got different unit economics. So you can afford different levels on those. So for example, Amazon is more expensive. If you can get a gross margin of say 60% on Shopify, you might only get 40% on Amazon because of the way the costs are structured. So you can afford to spend less on Amazon ad spend, but you will get the halo impact of spending on Meta and Google ads as well. So as a collective, if you are going to go down that path, as I said, it brings complexity, but if it is the right path for you to have those channels, the TikTok Shop and the Amazon channels, you will get you have to then look at marketing as a halo, because there is an element there where the spend in one will impact those others as well. So you can it might not look particularly nice in one set of unit economics, but we're tracking the overall company at the end of the day as well.
That's the way to do it. Even from the CFO perspective, take the holistic picture on marketing and brand building. All right, it's really cool. Okay, we can go on all day, but I will need to move to the final eternal question. What is your trade secret? What's the one sort of learning or lesson or principle that helps you every day?
So it would be remiss of me to have spoken about this so much during this call and not kind of nail it now with that. So as I said, most brands' cash flow issues are actually visibility, not capital. They assume they need money to grow. They normally need a clearer picture of where that money is. If they understand their cash conversion cycle, if they understand their unit economics, if they understand where their money is, they can they're not reacting and taking out high interest toxic debt. They can match the right cash flow gaps with the right funding products, such as trade to fund their inventory or even their wholesale. They can match the right products. So I think the trade secret is get really clear on your numbers inside out. Have visibility where your cash is, where your profits are being made.
I think that's a brilliant way to end the episode. Dan, where can people find out more about you and learn more about those insights?
I generally post on LinkedIn a few times at Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I have a weekly newsletter as well, specifically for D2C brand owners. It covers financial strategies, enabling people, brand owners, to improve growth, profits, cash flow. When you sign up, there's a D2C CFO playbook as an email course, and also a unit economics profit margin calculator with benchmarks for all of the different channels for people to understand where they sit against those unit economics. As I said, you can find me on LinkedIn or come join me on my list.
And I'm already on the list. Can strongly recommend. So, Dan Majors, thank you so much for joining today. This has been brilliant. I really hope to be able to do this again.
Fantastic. Thank you. I've enjoyed it.